Well, it is 12 o'clock and people who know WAVE know that WAVE starts exactly when it says it's going to. So welcome all of you who believed us, We did have a total of 38 people register, so I think that there may be a few more popping up and joining us now. My name is Mary Jo Deering, and I'm the president of WAVE. So as you heard, we are recording the session, and the video and the chat are going to be posted on our website a little bit later, not today, probably another day or two. So today's program is part of what we call our mutual support Zoom series, where one village shares information about an activity that can help other villages plan or execute their own activities. So today, Queen Anne Village is sharing its Ready or Not workshop and resources to help people plan for aging in place. And I know that this has been presented once before because it was a very a topic of great interest to a lot of people, but we're happy to either give it a second time to those who have already seen it or a first time to those who haven't. Now, please remember to mute yourself during the presentation, and please put any questions into the chat, and we'll get to them after the presentation. So now I'm very happy to introduce Margaret Glover, who is the founder of Queen Anne's at Home Village, and she will introduce her co-presenters. Margaret?
Thank you very much and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time on a really quite gorgeous day when I'm sure most of us would really rather be playing outside. So we will try to cover as much information as we can fairly quickly, but we do want to be able to answer any questions that folks might have. So I'm Margaret Glover, and joining me is Bob Jensen, who used to be, there he is. Bob
Still
Jensen is there you are, thank you. And Mary Jo Volpicelli, who is one of the phones on the screen here. So she's going to be chiming in towards the end of our presentation. And so I thought maybe I can just share screen here and okay. So this is our opportunity to share with all of you folks what we're calling our Senior Empowerment Suite, which consists of two key parts: the Senior Navigation Action Plan, which I'll be talking about, and Ready or Not, which is the second piece, and Bob is going to be talking mostly about that. I thought we would start with a little bit of background about Queen Anne's at Home, who we are, kind of how we got here, because the context really helps to inform how we came up with this program and how we're using it and why it's important, and also how we think it can be beneficial to some other villages. And my little mousey is asleep. There we go. Queen Anne's County, as many of you know, is over on the Eastern Shore. So anybody who has come over on the Bay Bridge from Annapolis, you've probably been stuck going one way or another on Route 50 as you went to the beaches, possibly. It is a mostly rural county with some population centers and a couple of big transportation corridors. And that's mostly what people think of when they think of Queen Anne's County, is that slog sometimes on a Sunday afternoon or a Friday afternoon across Kent Island. The county is growing fairly rapidly and also aging, which is one of the forces behind getting Queen Anne's at Home started in the first place, was just trying to figure out how the county is going to deal with so much growth and so much aging in a relatively short amount of time, with not many more resources coming our way. And in terms of resources, like many counties, but perhaps even more than some, there are some pretty significant wealth and income discrepancies in our county. Rich folks are rich and the people who aren't rich are not. And they're really two ends of the spectrum, with a fair amount in the middle, but that is important when it comes to understanding how Queen Anne's at Home is operating. We're a fairly young village. We started about 5 years ago. And of course, 2 of those years were in COVID. But we managed to grow throughout COVID because we decided that we were going to stay as active as we could. We spent a lot of time and energy getting information out there about everything related to COVID, and we helped people get their vaccinations, things that a lot of other villages, probably many of you on the call today, were doing as well. But we actually grew through COVID, which I think is fairly unusual. And I think a lot of it is really just kind of word of mouth, which is the great way for member organizations to grow. It's really pretty much how membership organizations do grow. We are a 100% volunteer village. We do not have a staff, and we do not have a separate group of volunteers. All of our volunteers are members, and all of our members are volunteers. And that is on purpose because, as I mentioned about the economic disparities, we discovered pretty early on that we were going to have to keep our dues very, very low. And we are pretty much at the bottom of village to village network dues structures. And that was intentional because we did start with higher dues, but we found that we were not able to get people into the organization who we really felt we wanted to serve. And subsidized dues do not work over here. So instead, we've opted for low dues and high involvement organization. And that's where our business model comes in, which is really based on thriving. In fact, our motto is seniors helping seniors thrive at home. When we looked around the county to see what services were being provided and where there were gaps, we have a great county. Our county services are really quite astonishing considering where we are. But it was really things related to thriving that people were kind of struggling with. The first part of it is the connection piece. And that's a lot of the social activities that almost every village does. And the purpose piece, which is the service section of people helping each other. And that's something that pretty much every village does. But we also felt like we were kind of missing something until we put in a piece of what we're calling empowerment, which is really helping to educate people, helping people plan, helping people learn what they were going to need for their next chapters. And that's where these programs came in. Senior Navigation Action Plan is a homegrown tool, and it consists of, right now it's in binder form, but our members can also download it electronically if they wish to keep it digitally. And it's basically a tool, incredibly detailed, that helps people get their households organized, whether it's a household of 1 or 2 or more, what all their contacts are, all their documentation, and everything really down to the last gnat's eyelash. Because one of the things we were hearing from people was everyone knows they need to get organized, but very few people have actually done it. Almost everybody has done some of it, but not everybody has done all of it. And what we were able to do in putting this together was to help people see that it really is a gift to their family members to get all this stuff organized. And it also serves as a terrific tool for sometimes difficult conversations with family members about finances and about healthcare and about preferences. And it goes well beyond things like 5 wishes, although it does include that. And we include a lot of educational stuff like safety and home suitability and emergency planning. So it's really quite detailed. And then in addition to that, we hold what we call snap chapters about, well, anywhere from 6 to 10 times a year, where we invite in an expert in some aspect of senior life planning. And they give an interactive presentation about how we can better prepare for whatever our future is going to bring. And those are pretty heavy draws. We got a lot of people that show up for that. We've done a lot on cognitive health, for example, where we've brought in lots of experts, and it's everywhere from nutrition and exercise to some of the latest research. And in fact, we actually took part in a pilot program on improving and sustaining cognitive health. And we've had such a good time doing that that we actually now have an interest group that meets twice a month to keep going on that. So what we discovered, everybody's heard the AARP statistics, that number of people who want to age in place, and it's way up there, especially as you look at older and older cohorts. But our own informal research indicates that less than 10% of people have actually come up with a concrete plan for how they're going to do that. People are pretty good about things like estate documents, like advance directives and wills, and some people have long-term care insurance, which is great if you can afford it. And hopefully everybody has a little bit of a nest egg, but very few people have actually thought about the quality of life and this thriving that I'm talking about. And that's where the Ready or Not program came in. This again is a homegrown tool, and get in to wake up my mouse. It's a toolkit with tons and tons of worksheets and homework, and it really helps people focus on the big questions, the things that kind of keep us up at night. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Bob Jensen, who served as both a guinea pig as we were putting the program together, and then subsequently a facilitator of the workshop we did a couple of years ago. So Bob, if I could turn it over to you and let me know when you're ready for the next slide.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Basically, I'm not as, I don't have as elegant a description of all this as Mark does, but to me, what Ready or Not is about is presenting people with a list of questions for them to consider in actually making a decision about what they're going to do with the rest of their life, as opposed to just letting it happen, and to give some actual choice in the matter at a point where it makes a difference. And so there's basically 2 parts to the Ready or Not program. One is what is called a toolkit. We also call that a questionnaire. It's not a short one, it's a long one. And the second part is the sessions involving groups of people where they kind of go over their thoughts about this sort of thing. And to me, the questions that are raised, there are no answers to them. There are no right answers to them. But they're questions that we feel people should at least address in coming up with a plan for what they're going to do with the rest of their lives. This was developed at a point when we were making those decisions, and there's a lot of things one thinks of, but you may not think of them all, and it's a good thing to do. So, well, what's going to happen if if this disaster happens, or this one, what are we going to do? What's important to me? And these are broad questions. These are broad topics. There's a lot more detail on it. What's important to me? In other words, rather than just being stuck on a train and going to the next logical or easy step, is there a change I want to make in my life and my circumstances at this point? Now that, getting older, things are changing. This may be a time to take control rather than just be passive about it. So it raises those questions. Who's my person? That's what that means is, what I certainly came to realize very strongly was that I think I'm in pretty good shape right now. I've got my finances in order. I'm on top of things. I'm fairly cognizant of what's going on, but we know that's going to change. And when it does, who's going to be stepping in to help me make those decisions, or to make those decisions for me when I can't? So there's the whole series of questions about that. Why don't we flip to the next one, Mark? So basically, as I say, the core of it is the toolkit, the questionnaire. And it's possible that one could just pass this out to people and say, these are things you ought to think about in coming up with what you're going to do with the rest of your life. Give it some thought and see what ideas you have. And there's something in that, I guess. But we've combined this with a workshop for a couple of reasons. One is, and I'm not necessarily going to go in order, but to me, one of the important ones is that it imposes some discipline. If you give people this big long questionnaire, there will be a tendency on the part of many people, and I think it might have included me, to sit down, sit in a chair, go through it, nod your head, say, yeah, that's good. Yeah, you should think about that. And it might fester there, and you might get somewhere with that, or you might just go through it really quickly and never do anything more with it. And so to encourage people to actually consider it seriously and to actually use it as a basis for decision making, we decided to combine the toolkit, the questionnaire, with a series of in-person workshops where basically one would be encouraged to actually go through the process and not just skim through it and put it aside so you could do something else. So the workshops are groups of 8 to 10 people led by a facilitator who are basically given the questionnaire. They'll have the processes described. Everybody talks about their goals, why they're here. But they're supposed to go home and think about it, talk importantly with a spouse or partner if they have one, see if they can come up with something jointly, and then come back and knock around ideas. And we found that to be a very valuable kind of session for a variety of reasons. One is you have people, in any group, you have the wisdom of crowds, and people come up with ideas you didn't think of. But there's also, we think, a sense of comfort in being around other people who are going through the same process and being in some ways, and this is what we found, surprised by what they hadn't thought of. And everybody facing that together, it gives you a sense of community and comfort that you're not on all this alone. Let's do the next one too, Mark. And the way that the mechanic has worked in the past is we have one session of our 8 to 10 people to introduce the process, get people talking about their goals, pass out the document. Then the participants are given a homework assignment, which is to go home and go through the toolkit, consider how it might affect them, what their answers to the issues may be. And very importantly, as I said earlier, well, let me back up a second. We encourage people to do that individually. There may be a couple involved, each gets their own questionnaire. We encourage them each to go through it themselves, come up with what they think their own answers would be, and then talk together. And obviously, it's not always the case that they will end up, that they will start out with the same perceptions of what the issues and solutions are. And so we find that to be a very useful mechanic to get people talking about things that it's not that they've necessarily avoided talking about, although that might be the case, but talking about things that haven't occurred to them to talk about, and to try to come up with a plan for a couple. So after they've had some number of weeks at home to ponder this, there's one or more follow-up sessions. And I want to emphasize that it's not the purpose at the workshops to have every person talk about what their precise plan is. If they want to, they can, but it's not intended to force people to disclose decisions or concerns that they don't want to. But it's always been the case that there's a lot to talk about, even without asking everybody to say exactly what their own particular plans are. There's been a lot of commonality in terms of recognizing and understanding big issues. And so, these sessions last, probably an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. And as I say, it's 1 or 2 follow-up sessions. It sort of depends on the group. Some groups get quite involved and want to keep going, and others, are done after a little while. This integrates really well into the SNAP resource that Marg was describing, because although it's not expressly laid out in the questionnaire, a lot of the issues that are raised in going through it can be addressed by information already available through the SNAP process. So it's not an express tie-in, but the links are fairly clear if you want to use them, and it does provide a resource for follow-up. Trained facilitators, that's what we've done. It's how groups work. If you don't have a leader, 1 or 2 people are going to talk the whole time, and we want to ensure everybody gets a voice and feels included. So that's kind of the overview. Is there anything I should add, Mark, that I haven't covered?
No, I think that's good. We have some more information about sort of from the participants side of things that I'll pull that up. And just to say that in the most recent revision of our Ready or Not plan, we actually have been making a clearer link with our SNAP program, so that when people come up with an issue and they're wondering, how are we going to handle this at home, if we do have something in our SNAP program that helps them do that. And so these are 2 tools that do link together. We are constantly trying to improve and make sure that they are as useful to our folks as possible. But I think Bob's presentation is exactly right. The whole point of all this is, I think, yes, to get a plan, but really to make sure that the conversations are happening, that people are thinking about these questions, because what we found in that 95% 95 want to, 95 don't have a plan, is people tend to wait, and then they're trying to have these conversations and think about what they're doing while they're in a crisis. And we know that that is not where you want to be.
Marge,
Mhm.
this is Wendy. Can I just ask some questions about what you've covered so far?
Sure.
We had thought maybe we were going to hold them to the end, but I know you said you had to jump in and off, so.
No, I'm happy to hold to the end. I'm sorry.
Okay. One of the questions that did come in is whether we do this via Zoom, and to talk a little bit more about the facilitators, which we can do. We decided not to do this via Zoom because we felt that because we're really talking about kind of big, scary stuff, that the sort of personal connection that happens in these workshops is really important. And so could you do it via Zoom? Yeah, you probably could, but we opted not to. And I think from the members' perspectives, it was, as I put up here on this slide, it really, those personal connections and what Bob was talking about, where people feel like, yeah, we're kind of in this together. You know, everybody is facing these questions. My family situation might be different from Bob's, but I still have to think about this stuff. And that personal touch, if you already have a group that knows each other pretty well, like through our social activities, we do a ton of social stuff, and there are people who already know each other. I might be a little bit more comfortable doing a Zoom, but Bob, I don't know, do you want to speak any more to that and talk a little bit more about just the facilitator and how that works?
Yeah, I don't have a lot more concrete to add. I certainly have the gut feeling, and it's nothing more than that a lot of the value of this program is in the personal get together among 8 or 10 similarly situated people, where they can, look around, feel part of and not feel isolated, feel part of a group, and bad ideas back and forth together. It just never, those sorts of things just never seem to work that well on Zoom. So I have, fairly strong but unsubstantiated views on the subject. In terms of the facilitator, that we've got a couple of people who have been trained in those lines, and so that's what we've done, because we've had people available who could do it. We haven't gone seeking outside assistance, and so there's just a resource that we happen to have available, and has worked well.
Morgan, can I give my personal experience?
Thank you. I was just getting ready to toss it over to you, Mary Jo. Yes, please.
Okay. First of all, Bob was our facilitator, and what I think is important, and I definitely kind of agree with him, I don't think it's the type of workshop to do on Zoom, because it is very personal what you talk about. And we did meet not in conference rooms, we met in people's homes, which made it even more comfortable. But at the time that I took it, I had just retired, and my husband was still working, and we both had very busy jobs, and we really hadn't talked about a lot of things. We don't have any children, so we really never did a will. We never really did advance directives because we were pretty healthy. So it really got us moving. First of all, talking to each other about what we wanted to do, what our next steps were, and then making a plan to do them. And we have since obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but we have since had wills, we've done our advanced directives. It really moved us to decide that we wanted where we now. So we ended up renovating our house, and we tried to make it accessible, you know, like putting bars in certain places. Not that we needed to yet, but we did it in anticipation that if one of us becomes somewhat disabled or needing some help. It also caused us to talk to like our families, decide from nieces or nephews who we wanted to be, as Morgan said, our person to help. And, you know, we really, we talked about how we decide what we're going to do about Social Security and our medical, because we also, at the time we took it, we were not old enough for Medicare. You know, a lot has changed, but the other thing that really that we've done that really it kind of spurred us, and it kind of went with SNAP because they did a whole session on it, was getting rid of clutter. And we just got rid of so much stuff because, you know, one thing that's really important to us is that we don't want to leave anything behind after we're gone. We don't want to leave a mess for other people, and especially since we don't have any children. And and we took it with 3 other couples, and there was a woman also who took it who was by herself at the time. And I think that even though at first I thought it was geared to couples, you can definitely take it if you're single, because I think that's important just as much. And Bob was a great facilitator, so you really do need to think about, if you're going to do a program like this, who you want to facilitate. He was just very easygoing and really allowed everybody to talk or not talk if people didn't want to share, didn't feel uncomfortable. I kind of not disagree with Martin, but I guess I felt easier talking to people that I really didn't know. You know, I didn't know the other couples at all, and that to me was a little bit easier, I think, than I think if I knew people, or, you know, if they were just neighbors. So it really helped my husband and I really talk about things that we hadn't discussed. And I think that's what I want to share.
Great. Thanks, Mary Jo. That's a great perspective. I think having somebody who's been through it, both Bob and I have been facilitators, but we also participated in developing the tool and the toolkit that goes along with it. So I thought maybe what I would do is just start at the top of the questions in the chat and work our way down.
I think the first one is from Judy Berman that I see there, right? I mean,
Okay.
you've answered.
How do you manage if there are large disparities in resources available, or do we group according to socioeconomic status? That's a really interesting question. We don't get into any of our members. We just don't get into any of that. So we wouldn't know anybody's financial situation. And because of the nature of the questions, and Bob and Mary Jo, feel free to chime in if you think I'm getting off the rails here, but the questions are really just big. So for example, one of the first worksheets that we ask people to do is to define what is home. You say, I want to stay in my own home as long as possible. Well, what is home? Initially, almost all of us think about our house. I want to stay in my own house as long as possible. But what we've discovered in partly as a result of the workshop itself, but then also in continuing to work on materials, is if you can expand your concept of what home is, that opens up a lot more possibilities. And so we have people just think through. And as Bob was saying, what's important to you? Is it to stay in your community? Is it to stay in a particular part of the country? Is it to have access to, you know, a walkable town? What might it be? And these are all things that we kind of know, and maybe we've sort of talked about, but these questions just really lay it out in much more detail. What you do with that and how you then proceed with that is, of course, going to be influenced by your resources. But anybody can talk about what their concept of home is. Another conversation that we ask people to think about, a lot of people would say right off the top, oh, well, I'm going to move in with my daughter. It's almost always a daughter. I'm going to move in with my daughter, which we say that's a wish. That's not a plan. So we have a whole workshop section or a whole worksheet if you're planning to move in with family. And that's, you know, everybody's family situation is different, and some are kind of difficult. So we don't ask people to share anything that they don't want to, but we can all talk about how would you plan on making that successful, and what do you need to take care of before you get there first. Training requirements for facilitators. And then Wendy went on to say, are we saying that our facilitators had training in previous career and skills? Yeah, Bob and I have been the facilitators for our workshops, and we do have, for a host of reasons, facilitator and mediation training prior to that. So that's, those are some skills we have. They're learnable skills, but we were very fortunate that we had some folks who already have that. I'm going to skip over Holly's question and then come back to that in a second. Holly, don't let me forget. Is there a target life stage for this? Should people have retired or not yet retired before Medicare or after? I think that Mary Jo's input was really terrific, that it's a benefit no matter where you are. She and Vinny were still working, were not Medicare eligible, but we've had people who are well into their 80s take this workshop. And so it's really just wherever you are, start thinking about this, start having the conversation. Now, one of the things we all know about making a plan is you could be really great at planning. Planning was part of my career. And so I know no matter what I plan, it's not going to happen that way, right? You know, something's going to happen that I haven't planned on, or the timing is going to be off, or something else. So yes, coming up with a plan is kind of the purpose of the workshop, but it's really the questions that matter. And so how I think about the questions when I'm in my 60s, I hope is going to evolve by the time I'm in my 70s, in my 80s, in my 90s. So the workshop and the toolkit also gives me a path that I can come back and review as circumstances change. I think this is what we're going to do. My husband and I are going to do, but you know, and I think this is how we're going to handle these contingencies. But I'm also hoping that there are going to be more alternatives available to us in 10 or 15 years. So it's an ongoing kind of thing. Let's see, this is also Judy, I think, talking about grouping solo agers together for similar activities. And I think that's certainly doable. We did not feel the need to do that right off the bat. But it might be interesting, because even if you're in a household, one of the big questions that you have to tackle right off the bat is what happens if or when one of us becomes a solo. And so really kind of thinking about that before it happens or after it's already happened, you still kind of come down to these big universal questions.
Margaret,
Yes,
before we get to Holly's question, which I think would be a very good wrap up, I have a few that I'd love to stick in here, and we can monitor the chat too. The first one is a very precise small question. What are your dues?
our dues are $50 a year for singles and $75 a year for multiple household. And a multiple household almost always is 2, but we do have one household of 3. I think we're thinking about a household that may have 4. So like I say, family dynamics and constellations are different. So that's how we've set it up.
And I have another question. You've been doing this now, what, for about a year, I guess. It's not going to make that precise, but this is obviously a resource where you might get new members, or you might get people who just haven't done it before. Do you sponsor your cluster of meetings? Like, do you launch a new round of this periodically to bring in new people who haven't done it before?
Yeah, we've actually, I think we started this, like I said, we had to take off the COVID years because we did not do it via Zoom. So we did it for about a year and a half before COVID, and we're just now kind of ramping back up. Our vision is that we would offer it probably about twice a year if there's a demand, and that again depends on how quickly we grow and whether just, you know, how often people want us to do it. We're going to get one more in this year, and we will probably offer one in the beginning of next year, and then see whether there's enough demand to do it again.
And I have a final question, which I think you've sort of talked about, but I didn't hear a precise answer to the thought that was in my mind. Obviously, as you've said, and as the other Mary Jo has said, this is a great way to involve families. Is there a component of your program that explicitly they get to that point, it says, now, you know, go talk to your families about this? Let me just share a little anecdote. My father, who's been dead almost 15, 20 years now, from the time that he retired, he had a binder like yours. And every time my sister and I would go down to visit, they were in North Carolina, he would insist on 10 minutes to take us into his little den. Now, I want to show you what I've updated in here. And, you know, you'd roll your eyes at this, you'd roll your eyes. But by the time he passed away, it was one of the most marvelous, you know, tools that we had. So again, obviously your program lends itself to involving families, but is there some point at which it's sort of like a homework assignment to, you know, go out and talk to families?
We strongly encourage it. We don't make it an explicit expectation. I think at some point, certainly during the ready or not piece of it, we talk about it a lot, because you get to a point where you say, well, you know, this is what's going to happen, for example, when I can't be in my home anymore, or I'm going to be in my own home, but maybe I'm going to have people come in and help. And at that point, you really do need to have your family at least understand what you're doing. And a lot of the worksheets are set up so that you could break it down into smaller conversations like your father did. You know, I want to talk to my person about how I'm defining home and what's important to me. My person lives over in Portugal, so it's really important that we all understand what's important to us. And I also understand that there are some things that he's just not going to be able to do. I would love it if he would be able to do X, Y, or Z. It's not happening. So we need to have that conversation, and these tools make it much easier to do that. And with the SNAP binder, the Senior Navigation Action Plan, there are lots of opportunities to go through it. I mean, even our decluttering, we have a whole chapter on decluttering. You know, we have to break it. You know, the hard news to our members is nobody wants your stuff, you know, all these things that you've been collecting, and you have your great grandma's painted china. Yeah, guess what? Nobody wants it. So those are good opportunities to have conversations. And we're trying to normalize these types of conversations. So you have maybe a global conversation on this is how I think about home, and maybe you dive in a really explicit conversation of what am I going to do with great Aunt Tilly's hand painted china. And then when you get to some of the more difficult chapters or complicated chapters like advanced care directives or getting into finances, which some families have a really, really hard time talking about. You've already kind of normalized this idea that, well, we just talk about this stuff. Doesn't have to be big, doesn't have to be scary. We just talk about this stuff. And the kids can start talking about what their plan is going to be as well.
If Wendy's still on, I cut you off earlier on, Wendy, and you said you had a few questions. And I know we answered one of yours in the chat, but if you had others, questions.
No, I mean, we've covered most of them. I think the piece that I'm zeroing in on is the skill set of the facilitators. Then that's something that we might be able to go and look at our volunteer pool and say, does somebody have this skill set? But at the same time, it might be something that we end up having to pay for in terms of bringing in a consultant who has this skill set. It just seems it's not, I'm looking to gain more information about, Marge says that this was something she brought to the table. She already had it. And so I'm thinking about that aspect of doing the program.
Well, in your community, if anybody's gone through like a mediation course, like we had one in our community, I really think that taking that course really does help.
And again,
Yeah, there may be resources in your community that you would not have to pay for. In fact, Bob just left the room, but one of the areas where, I mean, he's got a legal background. I mean, he's already very, very familiar with this, but CASA does a lot of mediation training. A lot of the courts have volunteers who do that. So that's a possibility. I think, Bob, we were just talking about the skill set for mediators, listen to me, facilitators. I think they can come from all different walks of life, and people who are empathetic, people who know how to run a meeting and keep people on track if somebody's starting to kind of monopolize the conversation, or there's somebody who's sitting in the back and hasn't said anything and you need to bring them in. People with a deft touch to ask people questions that get them to think, but that don't make them feel like you're putting them on the hot seat. So these are just kind of general people skills. I wouldn't say necessarily that it's a professional grade. What would you say, Bob?
Yeah, I think it's a fair description to describe the need for a person that you call a facilitator for the group, but it doesn't have to be a trained professional facilitator. Somebody with the skills that the Marg has described can do it. So I wouldn't view it ever as necessary, maybe even desirable to bring in an outsider to do it. I think it'd be much better to have a member with sort of a stake in the game to do it. I was a member of a support group, large support group, 20, 30 years ago, which had meetings at people's houses, around the DC area. And they were all run by other members who had received a small amount of guidance on how to do it. It worked very well. I don't think that needs to be a problem. You will have people, I'm sure, in your organizations with the right kind of heart and caring and who have learned the lesson to let people talk for themselves rather than give them the answer.
Sure.
That's the key.
I know, I thought also that you guys said 8 to 10 people participating. Is that generally the right size for the group?
We have felt that it is. Yeah, it seems, 8 seems sort of a minimum size to kind of make it worthwhile, but you could probably do it with fewer. I don't think you want any more than about 10. You want, in a 2-hour session, everybody to feel they've got some time to talk. So it feels about right.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, well, why don't we then take up, yes, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, I had
Read again.
one,
Yeah.
I had one question. I know that, I know, I mean, I know that you have a model for how you're planning to distribute, make this information available to other people. And I'm wondering if you're open to sharing a list of the topics that you include in the binder. Just the topics,
Okay.
not the worksheets and things.
Yeah. Let me share screen with you again. Okay, wait a minute. Wrong, horribly wrong. All right, give me a sec. I thought I had this all set up and I just want to make sure I'm doing the right thing.
I was thinking of the snap one.
Yeah, okay. Since I can't really see what you're seeing, what are you seeing?
Just
Table of
content,
contents.
introduction, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter.
Well, we're seeing, it looks like this looks like the, this looks like Ready or Not.
Okay, give me a sec.
That's
got it.
okay. Now we're seeing Snap.
There it is. There it is.
Yeah.
All right, I'm not seeing it, so give me a sec. Technical difficulties have occurred. Okay.
It says
Phew.
snap,
All right, so here's the
snap binder table of contents.
Yeah, thank you. I'm now with myself. Here we go.
Oh, wait, excuse me.
It's disappeared, Mark.
Right. I was seeing stuff before and now I have a black screen.
Yeah.
Same here.
Yeah,
Okay,
whatever you,
all right, try again. All right, and we are looking for the snap binder, right?
right, table of
Correct.
contents.
So let me ask Bob a question while you're looking for it. The
Bingo.
radio- I'm sorry.
You want to finish your question, Wendy?
Just quick. So it sounds like there are two pieces. I'm just, again, it takes 2 or 3 times for me to absorb something. So one is the ready or not, and that starts with the questionnaire. And do you find that the ready or not sets of workshops potentially could be 2 or 3 sessions? I know that Bob talked about follow-up sessions, and I assume that that's the same as sessions, and that you'd go through the ready or not piece. And then as people come out of that, they're going to sort of evolve into, okay, now let's learn more and drill down on the snap pieces.
That I think is the theory. That certainly can happen. And as I said, we're a little open-ended on the number of workshops because it's to some extent up to the participants.
Mhm.
And if they want to just keep going and they've enjoyed what they're doing, they enjoyed dealing with each other, they'd like to explore it in a collaborative fashion, that's great. That doesn't always happen. But well, I don't know if things have changed, Mark, but as far as I'm aware, there's no precise mechanism that says, okay, you've now graduated from this program. Here's what we're going to do next. We basically have the resources available for people to follow up if they wish, but there's not a program to do so, at least not yet.
Right. So when you join Queen Anne's at Home, the first thing that happens, we do an even exchange. We get your application and your check, and you get your snap binder. So you get that right off the bat. Everybody gets that right away. And we encourage people to start working on it. It's a big document. It's a lot of work. And so we tell people, take your time. You start doing this all at once, unless you've already got your own system going, which is fine. If you already got your own system going, use the snap binder just to make sure you haven't overlooked something. So we encourage people to start on that right away. The ready or not is we offer it, and if people want to take it, that's great. If they don't, that's also great. And within the Ready or Not toolkit, there are some places where we would say, this is a really good opportunity for you to go and look at chapter 6. I'm making it up because I can't remember the chapter numbers, but this is a really great opportunity for you to go and look at chapter 6. Take a look at some of the tools in that chapter. So you can bounce back and forth. So you could start with Ready or Not. There's no magic to doing it one way or the other, but because our members get the Snapbinder right away, that's typically where they would start.
Just to give you an example,
I think.
Can I give an
Sandy's here.
example.
Yes, Mary
Okay.
Jo, go ahead.
Okay, because I got the binder, and to be honest with you, I didn't really look at all of it. But after I took the Ready or Not, the 2 chapters that we definitely looked at was one about decluttering, which we are continually doing. And the second one was about how to make your house accessible for the long term. So we hadn't really, those chapters didn't mean anything to me really until I took the Ready or Not and knew sort of what after my husband and I talked about it, what we needed to do. So that's just an example of how they can work together.
Terrific. Thanks, Mary Jo. So the Snapbinder is, we have a whole bunch of checklists and worksheets and fill in the blanks of everybody's important contacts. Where are your important documents? For example, we don't tell people you got to put everything in this binder, because there may be a whole bunch of reasons you don't want to put it in the binder. You might have some stuff in a safe deposit box, or it's at your lawyer's office. That's fine, but people need to know where it is. So the rule of thumb is, if my nephew in Portugal can't find it, he's got to be able to look at this book and know where to go and find it. Lots of medical records. We have a whole section on legal, financial, and insurance, end of life planning. And then planning the last chapter, which is really funeral planning, memorials and all that. And we have some checklists on that. The home fitness and home safety, that's part of what Mary Jo is talking about. Emergency preparedness is a big thing, because we find that a lot of seniors kind of get left out of planning. So we're helping people be a little bit more proactive. And then we have a whole bunch of stuff on just sort of general things that you need to know as you're planning your life at home. And then possession wrangling, which is not just decluttering Aunt Tilly's hand-painted china, but also office and electronics. And then to give you a sense of what's over in Ready or Not, these are some of the worksheets. Let me see if I can make this a little bigger for you. How do we define home? What does thriving look like for me? For me, thriving, I've got to be outside in nature every day. And if that doesn't happen, I'm going to be pretty miserable. For somebody else, it might be, I need to live in a walkable community where I can just go downstairs, go outside and get a cup of coffee. So my plan is going to be different. I'm picking Bob as the guy who needs a cup of coffee. My plan is going to be different from Bob's, but by having the conversation back and forth, it helps each of us identify what's really important to us. Chapter 2 is where things start getting a little scary. What might happen if? That is, for example, my genes are long, but not very good in the cognition department. So my mom lived to be 100, but the last 3 or 4 years were pretty tough. I have to plan for that. How are my husband and I going to deal with that? What are my options? And then how can we prepare, and what resources do we need? What additional information do we need? And that's another place where working as a group can be really helpful is if we're, talking as a group about something and we say, well, do you know anything about this? For example, in one of our very first workshops, we said, does anybody know anything about continuing care retirement communities and CCRCs? And some of us knew some of us didn't know anything, and some of us knew a whole lot, but we were able to work together and flesh out a lot of that information. And that actually became one of our SNAP chapters. And Bob and his
And that-
wife Jody were our
and that-
resident experts on CCRCs and how do you evaluate them and how do you visit them and what questions do you ask and what does a contract look like and all that kind of thing. So these are mutually supportive programs. I hope you get that idea by now.
Megan,
Yes.
we're at 1 o'clock and I know Seal has her hand up and I had something else to say. So, and I know
Okay.
our recorder has to leave. So Seal, do you want to get your question in?
Yeah, mine's very quick. Are you there? Sorry,
Yes.
I had a weird thing glitch happen with my computer. It sounds to me, Morgan, and especially, I think Mary Jo, your volunteer, your member Mary Jo seems to support this when she said, well, yeah, I didn't pay much attention to it at first. It sounds to me like this is such an important part of your offerings, your village's offerings, that you say it up front to everybody who joins. It's not, that's what seems very different to me than what we currently do with our various offerings. We kind of wait until they determine they're interested, or if they say something that indicates, do you know anybody who's a good home organizer, then that's sort of an indicator of interest. But it sounds to me like from the get-go, every single new member who comes on board, you're upfront with this and you give them the binder, every new member. Am I correct in that? It sounds like it's just, you've elevated this offering. That's just something that really resonated with me.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Yeah,
listen-
if you go back to our three principles of social connection and this empowerment piece and service, they each play a fairly equal role, and we think that they're all really important, and they all do tie together. And so, yeah, we're saying this is something that from our experience, most of us have gone through this with our parents, and we know what happens when you don't do something like this. So that's something that we really do press. And I saw Holly waving her hand there. So before we completely go off, is yes, these tools we have finally gotten our act together. It took us a while to figure out how to do this. But we are making the tools available. We are asking for villages to pay for it. And the reason for that, we wanted to do it free because we think it's so important. But because of our due structure, we're broke. We're always broke. And that was a business decision that we made. It was more important for us to get our services out into the community. So we did identify this as another, as the only, besides dues, source of income. We have developed a sliding scale based on the income of the village. Because since we're broke, we really appreciate it when people give us a break. So we decided to do the same thing. So we have a sliding scale, and we've made it possible that you can get either the SNAP or the Ready or Not, or both together. We've also done it so you can get it as a PDF, or you can get the materials as a Word document so that you can tailor it to your own needs. We do have a license agreement, and we're happy to go through that with anybody who is interested in finding out more about what's involved in the license agreement as to what you can and what you must and what you shouldn't do. So
Do you
does
have
that-
a contact slide that you can put up, or should the people just go to your website?
I think probably the easiest thing to do would be, if you're interested in following up on the materials, is to send me an email and I'll follow up with you. Excuse me, and let me put my email in the chat so that you have it. Let me see if I can do it.
Well, I can also send out an email to everyone who registered. And I can say, if
Yep.
you're interested in following up on this, then I will give your name and email too, but put it in right now. People would like that.
Oops, okay. And I just sent that to Carol. Let me just send that to everybody, to everyone. All right.
Can I ask how many members you have in your group?
Excuse me?
How many members do you have?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was coming from Mary Jo. I thought.
That was Mary Jo. I think she's
Oh, okay.
asking the other group.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yeah, well, Wendy at Arlington Neighborhood Village, we've got 355.
Okay.
okay. Thank
You're
you.
a little bigger than we
Thank
are.
you.
But that's just one of us on the call.
Yeah.
Right.
I want to make a couple, or I don't want to stop this. We can go a little while longer for some people, but if we're ready, I have one comment and one closing remark. So let me know when we're ready for that.
I just, like others, want to say thank you very much. I mean, we have thought about doing a program like this probably for the last year or so. So this session is really good about continuing to push us up to the starting point to get something done. And we'll probably try to do something as a pilot initially. And I'm just really appreciative of everyone's time and attention to this.
Right.
Great. Thank you, Wendy.
Good. Well, the one first point I wanted to make is that I know that Elizabeth Hale put into the chat information about a program that that they are offering on palliative care. And I just wanted to say that your program would bookmark or dovetail beautifully with an ongoing interest group of theirs, which is on real end of life issues. I know you don't get, it doesn't appear that you get deep into end of life issues, and I mean end of life. And they have a wonderful series. They don't have any written materials, but like you, they just have an individual who is very skillful at facilitating this, and it's been going on for years. And so I guess my comment is you might consider, seeing about how you could start an end of life discussion group for people who graduate from your SNAP and Ready or Not program. And I think that they, as Elizabeth pointed out, they are going to, benefit from having such a wonderful resource as you have for those who need to just plan their fundamental aging in place. So I did just want to then thank you so much. Thank you and the other Mary Jo and Rob for doing this. And I would like to say that, well, remember that this will be recorded, and I'll put that in the email that I send out. And my last plug is that WAVE is having its quarterly meeting next Monday, 9:30 to 12 noon via Zoom. And it will include details about the new Finishing Strong Award, which is an award that we are giving for villages to make proposals about any of a variety of types of end-of-life activities. The winner could win $3,000, or 3 people could win $1,000 each. So we'll be talking about that. And also, for those of you who are not members of Village to Village Network or who haven't had time, there will be highlights from that conference, which is going on this week, plus an introduction to our new website. So without further ado, with everyone's permission, I will say thank you again to our presenters and to all of our participants.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Jo.
Thank you, Mary Jo. Okay, bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.